If there's one thing we can all agree on, it's that humans will believe almost anything. On Blasphemy with Chris and Marnee, we take a look at some of these beliefs, uncover their very human origins, how they've developed and changed over time, and the very real consequences they had in society and culture. Impacts that continue even today in our lives. Hey, this is Chris Setti, and with me is my fine-looking wife, Marnee, sitting across from me. How you doing?
Hey, good.
I mean, it is good. There are good things to talk about right now. I mean,
Yeah.
I heard a man who we elected president on the TV today that didn't make me want to shoot myself in the face, which is nice. Oh man, I know there's going to be a lot of fucking crazy shit ahead, but we can at least celebrate that Donald Trump no longer holds relevance in my psyche on a daily basis. God.
Yeah.
Anyway, so today I want to tackle a topic that I've wanted to do for a long time because it's actually cropped up quite significantly, especially in the last year, but over the last 3 years or so. And it's been around, but it's largely been like an idea that you had to know about and have experience with. Certainly certain communities understood what was being said, but it's very coded language. And you could see it. And it's something I found out actually, I mean, while I was a pastor at a evangelical mega church, I was studying to teach a class in church history for a college that was starting a campus on our church campus. And I ran across this, and I remember it hitting me kind of like, holy shit, like, this is crazy. But at the time, I remember also thinking, like, this is like, you know, obviously, no one believes this. This is nonsense. It's crazy. It's, like, shameful, but, I mean, it's like, it's not going on. And that largely remained true, really, until recently. I mean, you would see it, and you would see these tropes and these ideas kind of like brought up, whether it be in media or whether it be in politics or something like that. But you had to really know what was going on. But lately, there's been a huge resurgence of this thing, completely repackaged in a way that appeals to people in 21st century America. And we really need to go back and look at how we got here so that people know what they're trafficking in, because this isn't true. Like, I'm going to try and stick to the script because this is going to be a long one. This at first, when I went through this, I'm like, I should probably summarize this history or just kind of breeze through this. And I'm like, this is really something we need to confront, because I don't think people understand how deeply ingrained these ideas are in our collective consciousness in the West, apparently, especially like the European West, which America would definitely be the product of. We get caught up in things and we think that we've discovered some new idea or isn't that crazy, but underlying it is some really dark shit that has been responsible for the death of literally millions of people. And so I'm gonna go through this. I'm gonna try and, like I said, I'm gonna try and stick to the script. It's like 12,000 words, so I don't know how many episodes this will end up being, but we'll get into it, and hopefully you'll stay with me. And like, you like history. This is like gonna be a huge history lesson today. That will cover the modern day incarnation, but first we have to go back and see that this is a legacy. It's not new. It's not something that you've stumbled upon. I know you're like, what is it? We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that tonight. I wanted to build a little spin. So, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So, thanks to the internet and the wonderful nature of human intelligence and our ability to not use it, right? Our world right now is really dominated by conspiracy theory, right? You notice how all of a sudden, I mean, it's been with us and we've laughed at it. We've had movies about it. We've we knew these people existed, but all of a sudden, everyone fucking believes one.
Yeah.
And so these theories, they're not consistent, right? They contradict each other. The boogeyman shifts and changes depending on the context, and the motivations for like these vast plans and plots to destroy whatever it is that you love.
Mm-hmm.
The motivations really change and are innumerable, right? Like this isn't a coherent thing. I think when people adopt a conspiracy theory, they think, "Oh, I've stumbled upon to the true thing, and luckily I found these people."
Mm-hmm.
There is 14 competing conspiracy theories about the thing that you're believing that are contradictory to what you and have totally different. And so there's obviously some human thing happening here, and not us discovering deep, dark, secret truths that people are trying to do to us. Over the last 3 years, and especially in 2020, you may have heard rumblings of something called QAnon. Or maybe you haven't heard that specific term, but you've been heard about the movement to #SaveOurChildren. You've heard about that, right? It's been all over the fucking place. We were in this little fucking town in North Idaho. We like camping, driving home, and we're driving out of this little town. There's people. Remember all those women and young ladies holding signs?
I had known that was connected to QAnon.
I know you know that, but a lot of people don't. So, or maybe you've seen the moms and young women gathering with signs, just like I said, decrying the rampant child rape and murder that is happening. Many of these people, motivated by such understandably emotional hot-button topics, had no idea that they had been taken in through the direct and deliberate manipulation of figures within the QAnon movement. You see, what happened is a conspiracy umbrella, which we're going to briefly talk about here, includes in it this idea of this, kind of satanic pedophile cult, which is ludicrous. Their beliefs are ludicrous. However, what they have is that hot button topic of a real thing, which is child trafficking, pedophile rings. These are real.
Yeah.
And obviously you see news, going on and stuff where these people are being exposed, like Jeffrey Epstein and stuff. I mean, these things are not irrelevant or crazy.
Right.
And so they grab our emotions. But what these people didn't know is that this was a way to bring them close to this movement. And once this is like any cult, name it, Scientology, Mormonism, sorry if you're a Mormon, but I mean, whatever. Yeah. Christianity, fuck you, whatever. Like, I'm not playing favorites.
Yeah.
You don't hit them with the real shit.
Yeah.
Right? You don't go like Xenu with Scientology. People be like, okay, you get them in.
I had a friend send me a Facebook message inviting me to a group that was nonpartisan and just wanted to address the issues of child, what's that? Save the children issue.
Exactly. So we're gonna
wait.
Okay, go ahead.
And I went over to check the group out, and it looked very innocuous. And I just sent a message back to my friend and said, "Hey, do you realize that this Save the Children issue is, though it's portraying itself as completely innocuous and not partisan and not anything, it is connected to this conspiracy theory QAnon."
Exactly.
And I got no response from my friend.
So you might be saying like, so fucking who cares? It's whatever. They're still fighting for like pedophiles. But here's the thing. The version and the idea that they're being sold ties into deep, 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 dark shit. It's not addressing the real problem, right? What it's doing is it's going after a shadowy.
That might have been what I might have said that.
Right.
I got no response.
So we'll keep going here. So what is QAnon, right? That's the question. Maybe you've never even heard that term. Many people have. In the news, it's been a lot, so you've probably fucking seen it.
Yeah, they're finally talking about it.
Right. So unfortunately, that's a huge topic that I can't possibly give a detailed understanding of.
Yeah.
Okay. But for our purposes, I'll just give like a broad overview of what the basic framework is. To understand this world, you have to first know where this whole thing cropped up. It started on 4chan, which was an image board where users could post completely anonymously, right? So this is like, it's where people gathered around certain interests. There were all these different boards on there. You had to post a picture. It's an image board, but then obviously there's a lot of text and conversations going on, right? And this is where things like men's rights activists and incels and the alt-right kind of crowd began to circulate and share memes. Most of the memes you saw early on, especially, were generated and circulated first on 4chan. Okay. Eventually, 4chan would be kicked off the internet, leading to 8chan, where QAnon found a new home. So 4chan gets kicked off the internet because the hosting service is like, we can't have all this racism and violence and stuff. And I mean, this is where places like, remember when we did the Alpha Male episode and we talked about Elliot Rodger? So he lived, this is where he
that's what I read, is it said that they kicked it off because they had found that so many of these mass shooters manifestos were there.
Exactly. And they elevated them to almost like these saint kind of it's pretty sick, actually. And there's even worse stuff, like talking about the right of men to have sex with whatever woman they want to. So legal rape. There's these things, and it's totally anonymous.
Well, the article I was reading was talking about the irony that the Save the Children QAnon thing is all about saving the children, but that there was so much child porn.
Oh, yeah.
IP addresses connected with 4chan and 8chan.
Right. This isn't a coherent world, right? This is a world that is completely biased and tunneled in on their own victimization, that they don't even consider that. It's crazy. Okay. So anyway, so 4chan's gone, and so 8chan pops up, right? And it becomes like the new kind of place where all this is going on. Okay. The nature of the anonymity of users on these boards is why the conspiracy itself, or the community rather, is known as QAnon, right? That's the anonymous part. Q refers to an ultra-high level of security clearance you can obtain in the United States government that allows you access to nuclear secrets. So Q is in reference to that clearance. And the reason why they came to that conclusion, why they know that, is because the whole movement starts on October 28th, 2017, when on the /poll board of 4chan, that's the politics board, a user, again completely anonymous, you don't know who it is because just numbers basically and letters, he posts this post and he signs it Q Clearance Patriot. And so going forward, his messages known as Q drops will be signed simply as Q. So this person or persons, you don't fucking know, right? It's just a anonymous poster on 4chan posts this message claiming to have high-level security in the United States government, that he's aware of this inner deep state plot, and that, he's going to be leaking out the truth, right? And he signs it Q Clearance Patriot. And like I said, going forward, it would just sign it Q. Okay. So QAnon, that's where that name comes from. It's anonymous posts on these chans. And anyway, and and so 8chan, you said you read an article. And so now what's around
is 8Kun.
8Kun, right? So
Kun.
8Kun.
Kun.
Kun. So, and I'll tell you why that is.
Okay.
It's such bullshit nonsense. So the guy who started 8chan, he actually left the United States. He kind of fled the government, and he ends up in the Philippines. And there's some speculation. Some people think that he's responsible for some of the Q drops or whatever to promote his site. I don't know. I don't know anything about that shit. I'll make some recommendations if people want to learn more about QAnon.
The article was saying that the owners changed hands.
They did. The people who created 4chan, I think 4chan was created by like a fucking 17-year-old or something.
Right.
And then he bought it, and then it got kicked off the internet also. Because of the same problem. Imagine that. So he ends up in the Philippines, and so he's under there's all kinds of issues. He's a very controversial figure in the community itself. But 8Kun, but there's also all kinds of like websites where they aggregate all that. We'll get to all this. Okay. Now, prior to QAnon, there were other Anon boards that had similar claims to high-level information and influence, with users posting secret info that pointed to some high-level conspiracy. There was FBI Anon, CIA Anon, and all kinds of others. All taken as fun little LARPs for baby boomers and young white men who think Confederate flags are awesome. That was kind of the base of this whole community, okay? A lot of older folk in the QAnon, at least the early crowd. They might have drawn in the young yoga moms and stuff later through this child hook, but the base level QAnon folks were, it was tipped quite slightly towards our parents' generation. Q begins posting, making references to the quote, coming storm. Okay. And this becomes a big thing, the coming storm. Now, where do they get this from? Well, it was an offhand comment made by Donald Trump during a meeting of military advisors. Trump referred to the event as, quote, the calm before the storm. Now, clearly, this was just his typical 1950s macho sociopathic projection of strength. He was just fucking speaking off the... Anyone who thinks this man ever thinks of anything before he says it is a fucking... I don't understand you.
No.
But they see it as a clue that this big event is coming. Okay? And it becomes referred to as the storm. And so they're always like, the coming storm. The storm's coming. The storm's upon, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So, and while it started this way as this kind of fun LARP, it's turned into a for real cult at the very least, and a religion to a very large extent. If you look into it, it's much broader, deeper, and more crazy than you could ever imagine.
Yeah.
Okay. The storm is a common topic amongst the community, and they believe it involves the arrest and public execution of prominent Democrat, by the way, they're all Democrats, leaders who are engaged in the ritual torture, rape, sacrifice, and consuming of children. Why? Okay, so why are they doing this?
Here's my... Oh, that I know of people that listen to that and have perpetrated it, like perpetuated it.
There you go. Don't perpetrate. They
no,
haven't.
No.
They've eaten children, yes, but
no. Oh my gosh, a prominent, influential person of influence in the yoga community. Oh my gosh.
Right, it's pretty nuts.
She literally named that.
No, I know.
Satanists. Oh my God.
No, everyone listening to this knows someone that believes this. Okay, it's just that pervasive.
Kidding me?
And that's why I'm like, we need to talk about this, because this is not good for us to fucking be involved in. Okay, so now why though? Why are they doing this? Why are they raping? It depends. Because QAnons, it's not this rigid, cohesive structure. It's more like a clearinghouse for whatever you got. Okay, so you think reptilian aliens are the baddies, and the traitor liberals are serving them to help us, to help them slave us or something cool. People, they'll be like, awesome, whatever. Yeah. QAnon would totally accept that. Satanic and demonic forces, that is like most of their jam, so they're super into that. Okay, but you can kind of bring your own boogeyman. Yeah. Okay, to a large extent. So it's all very apocalyptic, of course, and the essence of their worldview is that this evil cabal, again, somehow only made up of liberals, has been able to operate completely unhindered. That is, until the election of one Donald J. Trump. You see, in their cosmology, they have this idea that there's this ancient order that has been operating in the shadows, but Donald Trump was born and raised for the purpose of exposing, punishing, and destroying the cabal forever. They even referred to him as Geodis, God Emperor of the United States. Essentially turning him into this like kind of divinely inspired Batman. It's like he's been trained for revenge. It's this weird. Now listen, folks. I was born in 1970. I've had a lot of experience with Donald Trump. This man was not born for anything. We laughed at him in the 80s because of his divorces and his silly, excessive fucking style and behavior. He was a laughingstock at a time when we really reveled in celebrity gossip like none other. We loved it in the 80s. You turn on E! Network or fucking whatever, Entertainment Tonight, Donald Trump was on there making an ass of himself. We laughed at him. It was great. No one went like, this man's a genius and probably headed for greatness. Oh my fucking God. Anyway, we're going to move on because it's too much. We could go
on. Yeah, but let's
So they believe that Trump is the savior in most corners of the Q phenomenon. Okay, most. Though there are liberal versions of the conspiracy, they're referred to as Blue Anon a lot of times.
Oh,
And
that's what makes me crazy.
but most in the QAnon universe retain the idea that Trump has been specially raised.
Chump.
The chump has been specially raised
Chump.
and prepared his entire life to face this evil. Okay, so wow, that's a lot, right? Okay. This coming reckoning that he's going to, like we said, they talk about sealed indictments. Like, these people are Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, of course. All of these people, you name it, they literally have indictments already. They're already guilty. It's all secret. It's all going to be sprung. That's the storm, right?
Yeah.
So when all this goes down, everyone's going to have to say, I'm so sorry. I thought you were a fucking lunatic, but you were right. And that sounds so petty, but that's literally what they call the Great Awakening. And whenever they reference the Great Awakening, the only payoff of the Great Awakening is everyone will see I'm right. And the reason why this is and why this impulse is there is because they have alienated everyone in their life.
Yeah.
They have either been cut off by family or have cut off family, because this is a true cult, and that does happen most of the time. If it is so us versus them, that if you don't understand this, you're on the side of Satan, why would I fucking even hang out with my family?
I literally left my fitness group that I was certified in because the founder of it is that crazy and is preaching this shit. And I fucking left, and it made it like it was like seriously disrupted my life to leave this group. But
yeah, sucked.
It's fucking real.
So in the Q community, there's really no like one leader.
When I say fitness, I mean yoga fitness.
There you go.
Yoga people,
like left wing
liberal yoga people, because they were
exactly
sucked into a Trump conspiracy.
This is the Whole Foods crowd, and it's that's why I'm saying this. This is why we need to fucking understand where this is coming from, because it's not new. It's definitely not new, as we'll find out, and it's ugly, dark, and hateful, and we need to fucking confront it. Yeah. So there's no leader though in the Q community. There's no it's not like this organized thing.
Yeah.
It's a true community that is very malleable, very kind of squishy, right? There are, though, prominent figures. There are certainly prominent figures who promote, and they're people that tend to have gotten in early on, and so they were, a Q drop would hit, and then it would get promoted on YouTube and social media, Facebook and fucking all over the place by people who are latching onto this and going, ooh, something's up here, and they're getting in early. So there are prominent figures, and certainly people in the community turn to get kind of the latest Q shit, but no one's like the leader, right? And they're kind of the ones, really, to be honest, they're the ones that are just willing to say crazy bullshit first, right? And then it gets spread. That's how our world works now, is you say something crazy and controversial, and then it's virally spread, whether people are agreeing with it or not agreeing with it, they're spreading it. And next thing you know, it's in the fucking our minds like a worm. The community, though, the info that they receive is in the form of what are known as Q drops. These are the posts that are signed by Q. Again, totally don't know who this is. And if it's one person or if it's the same person that started it, we don't know, because it's just an anonymous post that's happening. But they're called Q drops. And they wait they're just ready, right? They're like highly cryptic, vague, and these confusing statements that sporadically would show up on the chans, okay? And then, of course, they'd be promoted all over the place. The drops are nonsense, or are they? They are, right? They totally are. However, the QAnon community does not agree with that, right? And so how do you make sense? Like, what the fuck is he saying? Because it's very cryptic. If you read these things, don't go read these things. But I mean, if you go out and go like Q drops, they're all listed out there. I think there's even a Wikipedia page for it. But I mean, you can go and look and see what the drops are. And some of them are just like, what the fuck? They're just very strange, cryptic things, right? And so the question is, how do we know what Q's telling us? Like, what if there's orders in here that we're supposed to follow? We don't even know, right? And so people getting sucked into this conspiracy early on began trying to decode and figure out what was really being communicated. And so the community refers to these little clues that are left in these messages as breadcrumbs,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And the people grinding over the drops and trying to figure out what's going on and decoding them started calling themselves bakers. Breadcrumbs are the hints, the code, and the bakers are the ones that figure it all out, right? And then the decoded messages that show it was all really about some coming action or impending victory in their fight against dark forces is known as bread. So if you're driving around and you see someone with a bumper sticker that says Baker Forever, that's a QAnon person, and they sift through these nonsensical messages that probably someone's fucking with them by posting.
Understand that you just drove past a whack.
Yeah. It's
Wacka
so
doodle.
fucking stupid. Anyway, we could talk about this shit, I mean, literally for hours and hours. The nice thing is, though, amazing people, much more plugged in and knowledgeable than I am about QAnon. They've been tracking this, and I can recommend a couple places that people turn to if you really want to know about this stuff. There's a podcast called QAnon Anonymous. They have been in this game, tracking it, commenting on it, investigating it, debunking it for years, since pretty much 2000, late 2017, I think, early 2018, so early in the game. One of the guys on the show, his name is Travis View, just a dad. I think he's a single dad, maybe. And he just spent a lot of time on the internet and noticed this thing happening and started trolling them and kind of going like, are you guys fucking stupid? He was just a rational kind of dude that's like having fun with them. And essentially wound up being pretty much the expert in the QAnon phenomenon. He's been on news outlets all over the place now. So he's on there, and he no one knows more about QAnon than fucking him. And so check them out if you sponsor them on Patreon at any level. They also do a bonus episode every week, and they're great. They get great people on there, and they cover the whole spectrum. It's right, left, fucking everybody, right? There's a new one also called Q Clearance by Jake Hanrahan. He's a conflict journalist who pretty much spent most of his adult life in like war zones. His is mostly focused on trying to figure out who Q is because no one fucking knows. In fact, a huge rallying cry for the last 2 years at Donald Trump rallies, at press conferences, people are saying, "Why won't you ask the question?" That is a big. So there's some catchphrases in the QAnon thing. Where we go one, we go all. That's kind of their motto, their rallying cry, right? If you see hashtag in the fucking letters, I don't want to figure out my brain right now, but where we go one, we go all. And number one is, those are QAnon folks, right? And another thing is ask the question. Ask the question. And the question is, who is Q? Right? So no one fucking knows. And it's just this big confusing thing. I just want to recommend those two podcasts. So QAnon Anonymous, Q Clearance, they're good. I've listened to them all, and it's fucking awesome. But rather than tackle QAnon as a whole, I wanted to tackle a particular idea. And it's one of the few ideas ubiquitous throughout the movement. QAnon is pretty kind of, shifty overall. It's hard to pin it down. But pretty much everyone in the movement has one thing they know for sure. Adrenochrome is a real thing. You get it from babies and children by scaring and torturing them, thus building the treasured elixir in the baby system, at which point its blood is drained and consumed. Supposedly, this sick live-action Monsters, Inc. situation allows them to prolong their lives, heal and prevent diseases, and all kinds of other wild ideas. For instance, there are many people who will tell you that Ruth Bader Ginsburg should have died years ago, but she's been kept alive by these dark, shadowy, evil cabals because,
I'm going to be just getting mad.
You're going to get mad.
Mad.
I mean, we're
really mad as this goes on.
Probably next episode more so than this, because we're going to have to go back in time and get a real big running start. And so it might not be a lot to currently be mad at. But this early part, I know it's wild. Because this is true. I'm not fucking like,
I know.
I'm not like hyperbolic here. Okay. And there is nothing true that you can't go, okay, that's all crazy, but save the children. No. This is all rooted in nonsense, and it only serves to distract from a real problem from being fucking solved. they started with hashtag Save the Children,
Yeah.
and they got sued because there's a real organization
Yeah.
that's really fighting pedophilia
Yes.
and fucking human trafficking.
Yes.
And they're like, these people are fucking with, we cannot do our work. So they made,
Yeah.
that's why it's Save Our Children
Yeah.
now. So that's what makes this so hard and difficult, because it can hug people so easily.
Mm-hmm.
Remember Tom Hanks when he had COVID-19?
Mm-hmm.
Tainted batch of adrenochrome. That is what went around. The QAnon thing is that either it was just got messed up, or someone like tried to get him, whatever, you know. But Tom Hanks, of course, he takes adrenochrome. He's not aging at all. They always say like it's keeping him. Hillary Clinton staying young for. I'm like, she looks like a grandma. What is happening? Ruth Bader Ginsburg looked like a skeleton. I'm sorry, she's a great woman, but she was old, and like it was apparent she was old. No one was going like, wow, what are you doing? Well, I'm drinking baby's blood, you know, like, but keep it on the fucking stupid, right? Or maybe you've heard of Pizzagate. A lot of people have, but they may not understand that it is directly tied to this conspiracy. When the Podesta emails were linked, the same breadcrumb baking led to people concluding that any mention of food was actually a coded request for a small child. Again, to rape and murder and blah, blah, blah. The different foods like hot dogs, lasagna, and of course pizza all refer to different kinds of ages and kinds of kids, right? This conspiracy spread around the internet and led to a man shooting through the window of Comet Ping Pong Pizza. He was certain Hillary Clinton was holding small children in the basement so she could regularly go retank on adrenochrome. Crazy, yes. Scary seeing how these fantasies can break into reality with the wrong mix of mental illness bumping up against it.
Yeah.
That's fucking real scary.
Yeah.
That's the thing is it scary that people are crazy and believe this? Whatever.
Yeah.
Is it scary that it breaks into reality and causes
Yeah.
real death
Yes.
sometimes? Or possibility in this case?
Yeah.
It's not good. Now, this is definitely going to be a long episode. Actually, probably more than one long episode. You see, this is actually not a new idea or a new accusation. While it has been modernized and given some kind of pseudo-scientific edge to work in the 21st century, it's just new skin on a very old and very bigoted and very dark skeleton. For that reason, we're going to have to first take a trip back into the past and have a little history lesson before we dive into the story around adrenochrome and how it became the substance of choice in this modern day incarnation of. At first, I was just going to simply kind of give the highlights, like I said, but we really need to like look at this. So this is going to be like detailed. Okay, we're going to learn some things. Sit down. And some of these things, maybe some people have never even fucking heard of, right? Because honestly, this isn't taught in your history book. It isn't. It happened. It's history.
Yeah.
But it's not, whatever, You're like, where was George Washington in this? Well, he wasn't there. Well, fucking why do I care about it then? I'm American. So this is going farther back. Okay, pre-us. All right, so right off the bat, I'm going to give away the conclusion. Spoiler alert, right?
Okay.
I'm just going to give it away, okay? And I would call it a punchline, but it's not funny at all, like this whole thing. When you adopt a belief that they, right, whoever they are in your little world, are ritualistically killing children and drinking their blood for some purpose, you are taking part in an anti-Semitic trope that arose out of the Middle Ages England. Period. This is not like this.
Yeah.
It is this, okay?
Yeah.
All the bullshit they're saying is not true. It is just a modern day analog that has been repackaged by people who believe this shit from the Middle Ages still. All right? So it's not even like you can get away with going like, well, I didn't say it was the Jews. It doesn't matter. The people who think it's the Jews repackage this for you. And now you're trafficking in it.
Okay.
And I don't care who you say the enemy is. You're saying the fucking Jews because that is what this is about.
Okay.
Okay? You get me?
Yeah.
And disclaimer, I'm not a Jew. And also disclaimer, I'm going to say Jew a lot in this. I don't mean hard J, Jew. It's like a tough thing because in antiquity, they were known as the Jews. A Jew named this, a Jew named that. Today, it's, I would never be like, he's a Jew. Like that's a thing that's
What
hard.
do you
So
mean hard J, Jew? What does that mean?
a hard J? Because like, you're like, oh, they're, they're a Jew. Or like, that's a Jewish community. But when you're like, oh, Jew, that's hard J, right?
Oh, it's an accusation, like a
Exactly.
derogatory.
Yeah. I got that from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I don't know. I'm just assuming they're always right. I've literally watched that entire series, I don't know, like 78 times. They're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. It's a hard J. So I just let you know the word Jew is going to come out, and it's in the context of like historical. That's how they're referred to, and I don't know what to do about that. And saying like a person of Hebrew descent is a lot to say instead. So I'm going to say,
I guess you can't say they're Israeli because if they're not
that
actually
there
from
is
Israel.
no fucking Israel. That's what I'm saying. Is antiquity they weren't known as that until fucking 1940s.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
And then obviously before that, way back. But anyway.
Okay.
So this anti-Semitic trope, it's known as the Blood Libel and refers to the conspiratorial ideas that emerged out of Christian Europe that accused the Jews of sacrificing a Christian child every year around Passover. These ideas would develop and evolve, as we shall see, to include the consumption of blood and other wild ideas that presented the Jews as the enemy in league with Satan. Adrenochrome accusations aren't simply like this, okay? It fucking is this. It's the exact same thing. I want to get that across. If you are out there thinking this is happening, the story I'm going to tell you is what you're fucking saying. And it comes from a time that I don't think you need to.
Interesting, because the woman that I was speaking of, the founder of that yoga group, she has a Jewish name.
I know.
I'm not wanting to say her name.
That's the problem. Is she does okay? If she is Jewish, I don't know if she is.
Yeah.
Her last name is what we. If I said it, everyone would be like Jewish. Like it's come on.
Yeah.
That's the problem. She doesn't even fucking understand the fact that she's trafficking in shit that is literally against her.
Yeah. Or her ancestors or whatever.
This is serious. Like I'm dead serious. This is like, to me, people might think like, oh, this is important. This is fucking important because if we don't confront this, this is toxic and poisonous, and it's far more pervasive than you think. It's in our language. It's in our political discourse. All these things, there's sayings that are rooted in these things that are literally came from hating the Jews in the Middle Ages and us holding on to it. And people will be like, well, the media, they're the enemy. Jews, that is what they mean. Global bankers, Jews. Entertainment, Jews. That's what we thought in the 50s, too, when we accused them all of being Marxists and brought them in front of Congress and fucking questioned them about being communists. These are tropes that are deep in the American soul, unfortunately, and they're fucking dirty. They are. And this has risen to the top. It was bubbling down in like idiots. But now it's like being embraced by fucking middle class everybody. It's maddening because literally, it's because we're stupid and we don't know the past. We don't understand anything. And so you tell me something on the internet or you give me a meme that some fucking 12-year-old Scandinavian kid put on some fucking, and then it's ridiculous. Anyway, so let's take a look at where this belief originated, how it's evolved. We will once again see that very, very human things were responsible. Things that include some ugly shit, and it's really the same ugly shit that we see humans doing today, right? We're going to see, this is also maybe good because as I was going kind of researching this again, I mean, these are largely things I'd researched before because of things that I'd been involved in and what have you. But it's wild how relevant it is to today. We have not changed, okay? This is thousands of years ago, we're going now, and we're the fucking same. So when people tell me how evolved we are, I'm like, fuck off. Shut up. So when it comes to the historical evidence, we have gathered and kind of studied up to today, potentially the first accusation of Jews performing ritual human sacrifice goes all the way back to 2nd century BCE, actually.
BCE.
Meaning BC. Okay, so we used to say BC and AD. And people confuse that because they thought it meant before Christ and after death. So BC does mean before Christ, but AD is Anno Domini, which means the year of our Lord. Because we decided not to be superstitious people worshiping magical men in the sky as we're studying history and hard facts, it was changed to before the Common Era, BCE, and the Common Era. CE.
Okay.
So that's a pretty common. In fact, most texts unless you're in Texas or something. Most textbooks, most textbooks render it that way now, and that's how historians typically do that. So, but I say it's potentially the first one because the info is relayed primarily from a single source. He's like a Greek Egyptian writer named Appian, and there isn't really widespread evidence that what was going on. So Appian had been claiming that the Jews were required to sacrifice and cannibalize a Greek every year, or every 7 years in some copies or versions of his writing. This was done by them in the temple in Jerusalem while they swore eternal hatred to the Greeks. Now, this accusation was ably rebutted and debunked by Jewish historian Josephus in his Against Appian, but the problem was these weren't original ideas from Appian, right? These were ideas that had kind of been circling around in like Greek scholarly circles, but he's the first guy to actually put like a historical anecdote proof, you could say. It's one thing to say shit.
Yeah.
He's the first one that kind of accuses them of doing this. Now, I don't think that this, as you'll see, I don't think this is the root of blood libel in the sense that we have it today. Okay. But I do think this shows, again, that this is not a new idea.
Yeah.
Okay. We're fucking 2,200 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. And people are doing this. And we're going to talk about why this is. There are reasons why there was so much room to make up so much stuff about these people. Okay. That doesn't mean there's fault on the part of the Jews or whatever.
Right.
But you'll see there are cultural and societal things going on that are making this happen, not real spiritual or actual events or anything like that. Just like everything we fucking talk about, it comes down to a bunch of humans do a bunch of human shit, and then a bunch of humans not learning lessons from it. That's how we do things. So. Now, his evidence was a story involving a Syrian king who wound up in the temple in Jerusalem where he found a Greek prisoner who told him he was being held for sacrifice. Let's take a look at what went down and kind of the context around this, okay? So, after Alexander the Great dies in 323 BCE, he dies young. Now, Alexander was an interesting guy. Not only did he conquer the known world before he was like fucking 30 or some bullshit, he was highly educated, highly curious, and was one of those guys who went and conquered, but he was way more interested in spreading Greek culture, which they believed was superior, and they had a lot of learning, and there was a lot of development. I mean, our culture is so much based off of their culture, right? And we're like, America's number one. That's exactly how they felt, and they probably could feel it even more than we can.
Because they originated it.
Exactly, it was very different. And so spreading the culture was part of it. And he didn't roll in and fucking say, fuck all your shit, take this. He wanted to absorb their stuff and them to and he's like syncretism. He was he saw wisdom. Maybe some people don't know this. I'm huge into astrology. Our Western system of astrology is the Greek system. And the way we got that is because Alexander the Great stumbled upon, they had their own kind of astrological stuff going in Greece, but he shows up in Babylon, which had developed the 12 signs as we know them, and we're tracking the same 7 planets that and all that shit. And then he winds up in Egypt and conquers Egypt, and they've had a whole legacy of astrology, and they had all kinds of shit. And those two things together is the astrology we use. So he was kind of like a scholarly conqueror.
Yeah.
But he fucking dies. He gets drunk, falls down in the snow, and dies. And he's young. He didn't think he was gonna die, so he didn't name a successor, which throws the fucking empire, almost the entire map, into chaos, right? And so it eventually gets divided up amongst his 4 generals, like his 4 top guys, right? And the area that encompassed like Iraq, Syria, the Palestine, modern day areas like that, went to a guy named Seleucus and became known as the Seleucid Empire. Time goes on, kings come and go, and we wind up in 222 BCE. Okay, so the Seleucid Empire has been established, right, down there, and the Holy Land is a part of this, right, Palestine. The Jews are in captivity, right? They've conquered people, and they're under the rule of the Seleucid kings of the Seleucid Empire. So kings come and go, and eventually you end up in 222 BC with a Seleucid king named Antiochus III. He called himself the Great. He gave himself that name, so whatever. And he kind of was great. I think he was talking about his military prowess, which turns out he was pretty fucking good at it. He expands his empire significantly, like takes a bunch of territory because the other generals took other places and they become separate empires, and so now they're like, fighting each other in a way. So unfortunately, though, he's rolling over, he's gaining territory, but luck runs out when he runs into a little outfit that we know of called the Romans, right? And they fucking hand him his ass in 189 BC at what's called the Battle of Magnesia. And so Antiochus III, the Seleucid king, loses to Rome. And Rome, makes a treaty with him and says, we're not going to just fucking conquer you and destroy you. You can go back to your place. Here's the deal. You have to send us your heir as a political prisoner in Rome just to make sure nobody gets any funny ideas. It's kind of like, hey, we got your kid.
Yeah.
Don't fucking do anything that's going to make us have to do something to your kid.
Yeah.
That's pretty brutal. But I mean, that's like how they did things and kept the peace.
Well, that's like the tribes in New Guinea, the peace child that they would take to make peace between a tribe. They would give a baby to the other tribe and they were responsible if they did anything to that child, and the other tribe could attack or whatever the thing was.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
It works.
Yeah.
And so anyway, in 188 BCE, one of the king's sons was sent to Rome to fulfill the treaty. He was 27 years old, and his name was Mithridates, which is an awesome name of Chris. Mithridates, sounds like you're going to spear something. A year later, though, Antiochus III died in a military campaign, resulting in his oldest son, Seleucus IV. He called himself Philopater. Or Philopater, or how it's said to pronounce it Philopater, which it sounds so funny.
Yeah.
It's weird because it was a common epithet from Seleucid kings, and it means father-loving, which is creepy. It sounds like a really bad like Pornhub search or something like that. But Seleucus IV, this is Mithridates' older brother. He ascends to the throne, okay? But now that Seleucus is on the throne, he's got to send his heir to Rome because his brother's over there. They don't give a fuck about his brother. They want his kid, right? Because he could be like, kill my brother. I don't care. I got a kid, right? So they swap Mithridates out for his son, and Mithridates comes back. So he settles down in Athens, right? And, his brother's on the throne, and he's luckily out of Rome, back home, and doing the whole thing. Fast forward, though, to 175 BCE, and in September of that year, the king's right-hand dude, his name is Heliodorus, fucking stabs him, assassinates the king to take the throne and establish his line as the imperial line, right? So right now, everyone born to the lineage of Seleucus, the general of Alexander, that's the royal line. And so he's trying to fucking seize the throne. So Mithridates gets word of this, right? And he's like, fuck this, hell no, right? I'm the rightful heir to the throne because if my brother's dead, I'm the other brother, and this motherfucker isn't going to take it. So he gathers up his guys, and then a nearby king of Pergamum, of a nearby kingdom, he says, I'm going to help you because this feels like things are going to get upset, and when things get upset, Rome shows up.
Yeah.
And we don't want them showing up.
So we're going to calm this down.
I'm going to go with stability. So he backs fucking Mithridates as the rightful, thinking this will keep things calm. And so he succeeds. Goes, he takes the throne back, and you could just see him. He's like, fuck yes. Like walking into the goddamn, throne room. He walks in, probably like some heavy metal music or something in the background, just feeling like a champion. And then needle scratch. His fucking brother had to inject one more baby boy into his wife. And so he walks in, and there's an infant on the throne. And it turns out Mithridates is given the job of co-regent, which means you're going to teach and train and guide this child till he comes of age so he can take the job that you want. And he's like fucking pissed, right? And so, he's not really super pumped, but he's at least near the seat of power, right? So 5 years later, though, he says fuck it and kills his nephew and just ascends to the throne, right? Because that's how you did things back then. He names himself Antiochus IV. Antiochus and Seleucus are these family names that you see flop back and forth, basically. So he names himself Antiochus the Fourth and gives his title Epiphanes, which literally means God manifest. It literally means I am God on earth. And so this guy thought a lot of
Is that what
himself.
the word epiphany derives from?
In Greek, Epiphanes. Yeah.
Epiphany? Like I had an epiphany?
Epiphany is the divine presence on earth, right? Epiphanies.
I know, but I'm saying when
That's
we
what
say epiphany,
yes, that's where
what we're saying is like I just had.
When you have an epiphany, it's like divine inspiration,
Oh, okay.
but it happened in real, like.
Okay.
So he thinks a lot of himself. Is the point I'm saying. Now, remember those generals that divided up Alexander's vast empire? Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so one of the generals was named Ptolemy, and he took rulership over Egypt.
Heard of him.
His line would last for 300 years, ending when a very famous Egyptian queen killed herself, thus ending the reign of the Ptolemies forever. Her name was Cleopatra, but that's just trivia. We'll move on. But she was the last of the line of the Ptolemies. The Ptolemaic Empire. So the Ptolemaic Empire had lost some territory in the expansion activities of Antiochus III, of Mithridates' dad. The guy who's on the throne now, his dad, remember he conquered a bunch? Well, he took some from the Ptolemies, right? And so they hear the murder of the heir. They hear the murder of like the fucking king to be, basically, by his uncle, and figures, shit, this is going to throw the whole empire into chaos. And so he seizes that opportunity to demand territory back, to basically say, like, give it back or I'm going to take it back, right, is what he does. So Antiochus is not going to have that. He's Epiphanes, and he's also fucking feeling himself. So he sets out and just rolls over Egypt. He literally conquers the whole place, everything except Alexandria. He even takes the king hostage and basically leaves him in place only as a puppet. He says, look, you're my bitch now. And so you do what I say. And, you're basically just an extension of my rule in Egypt. And so he manages to do that. He doesn't capture Alexandria, but he pulls away and goes back home because he knew, I got to leave things as I left them. Because again, Rome hears wind of anything like this, they're going to come a-calling, right? And Rome's, at this point, pretty much unbeatable. So he comes back home, leaves the king in place, again, to like make it look like nothing happened here. But now he's kind of fucking boss, right? And so a year later, in 168 BCE, he decides, I'm going to attack Egypt again because he didn't make it to Alexandria, and he's gotten word that as when he left, they all got together, elected their own king, and said, fuck you, we're our own country now, right? Yeah. And he's like, oh no, he wants to go get them too. So as he gets up to the city, there's just this old man standing in the fucking desert, right? They're like, fuck, this is Egypt, right? Going up to Alexandria. There's just this old man standing there alone. And so Antiochus rolls up to him and stretches out his hand to say, hey, what's up? And the guy doesn't shake his hand. He just puts like an edict, a scroll in his hand, and tells him to read it carefully. And so he opens it up. And what it said was, if you don't turn around and go home, Rome is going to consider you at war with them. Like, this is basically your only warning. And Antiochus, he calls himself Epiphanes, right? He's God on earth. Yeah. This is insolence. But he also understands Rome will fuck his shit up, right? So he's pissed and decides to calm down and says, hey, how about you give me some more time? Give me a little time to think about this. And this old man, now his name is Gaius Popilius Laenus, who is an actual exceedingly powerful figure in the Empire of Rome. He's consul to the Senate. That's why nobody's going to harm this guy, because basically you're done. You guys are all going to be done. He grabs a stick, breaks it off a bush, draws a circle around Antiochus and says, you need to give me an answer before leaving this circle. If you leave without answering me, we're going to consider that you've chosen war. And then he just steps back. And again, Antiochus is all pissed off, but he also understands the stakes. And so he finally agrees and says, okay, I'll withdraw. And only then did he shake his hand and greet him as a friend and then send him on his way, right? Antiochus now, he's beaten, right? He's fucking not feeling good, right? So Antiochus, not happy at all, right? This is not his thing. He goes home with this tail between his legs, basically. Okay, so meanwhile, though, back in Jerusalem, a rumor starts spreading that the king was actually killed in battle while he's out there. And that starts kind of making its way around Jerusalem. Now, during this time, there's like a huge divide in the Jewish community, under this rule. There was a faction of the Jews that were Hellenized. In other words, they had accepted Greek culture, saw it as something to integrate into, largely had either relaxed or letting go altogether the laws, dietary, even worshiping the pagan gods, right? Not all of them, though. There were some Jews that were Hellenized Jews that were still Jewish. They still read the Torah. They still studied the Torah. They still practiced the things. But however, they also saw a relaxing of like, we can get along with the Greeks as well.
Yeah.
Okay. And then there was also another faction that were the conservative traditional Jews who were like, fuck no.
Yeah.
We're never going to do anything like them. We're going to remain completely uniquely ourselves and never compromise.
Yeah.
Okay. Sound familiar, right? There was a conservative wing of the party and a liberal wing of the party. And guess what? Within the liberal wing of the party of the Jews, there were some who felt that others were not liberal enough.
Yeah.
And that they were too accommodating to the traditionalist Jews. And so there was a lot of divisions happening already, but now this rumor starts spreading that Antiochus is dead. And because they had these divides, some people took this opportunity to maybe deal with their own issues. The guy who was the current high priest at the time, who had been installed by Antiochus IV, was named Menelaus. He had got the job by like sneaking around, kind of doing some dirty politicking, finding his way in front of the king, and then basically talking shit about the current priestly family that held it. He told them, I'll be way more friendly with the empire and with the Greeks. I'll make sure that we're way more, cool with you guys. And he even revealed truths and like secrets and shit about treasures and the gold and the kind of stuff they have in the temple, right? He sold out hard and he gets the job, though. Of course he got the job. That meant that the current high priest was deposed. His name was Jason, which we know he was a Hellenized Jew because Jason is a Greek name.
I was going to say, that doesn't sound like a Jewish name.
Okay, but listen to me. Listen up. All you Jasons, listen up. Jason is just Greek for Joshua from the Hebrew, from the Aramaic, Yeshua. Your name's Jesus. So if you're out there and your name's Jason, lean into that. I don't know if you knew that, but yes, Jason was just the Greekified version of Joshua, which is what Jesus' name was. We say Jesus, but to the Hebrews, it was Joshua's what they were saying.
Same.
Right. So anyway, there's your Jesus Jason connection. It's pretty awesome, actually. Let's see, where was it? So I was saying that Jason, Jesus. Anyway, Jason, Greek Jesus. He gets 1,000 of his homies together and goes and attacks the temple, chases Menelaus out. That's the one that the king had installed. He has to bail because of all the riots, and they take over the temple. But right about this time, Antiochus rolls into town feeling like a punk-ass bitch, right? Just got beat.
Yeah.
And he decides to use this opportunity to take out his rage at the situation. He pretty much goes about slaughtering the population to a large degree. Now, it's so hard because when we read the recorded histories of a lot of these people, we think that they're recording events as they actually happened, and that was their goal. And the reason we think that is because we also think we do that, which we don't, and they don't.
Yeah.
Okay? There's a story being told.
Right.
It's not the story of the facts that happened, right?
Yeah.
It's the story like any other story. It's the story like QAnon, right? It is my amazing past, my horrible present, and my redemptive future, right? It's that story that we're telling. And so there's accounts from Jewish sources that say 40,000 Jews were killed and 40,000 were sold into slavery. Now, I don't know if they counted them out and made sure that was equal, but that to me sounds like they're saying a lot of people died and a lot of people were sold,
They use
which
numbers
is true.
Symbolically.
Exactly. And, some people put the estimate like maybe realistic around 10,000. That's a lot of people in one city to be killed, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, he doesn't just stop there. He fucking rolls into the temple. That's a big no-no, first of all. Gentiles, you don't walk in the fucking temple, right? He rolls in, destroys everything, strips it bare, tears the veil, exposing the Holy of Holies. Huge no-no, right? Only the high priest can fucking go in there, and only once a year, right?
Yeah.
And basically steals everything in there, right? Then, he doesn't even just stop there. Like, that's enough that you're like, fuck them up. He installs a huge statue of Zeus in the Holy of Holies, sacrifices a pig on the holy altar. If you're familiar with Jewish kosher laws, they can't even touch a pig live or dead.
Yeah.
This is the ultimate desecration that he's trying to do to them, right? In fact, in the Bible, this event is referred to as the Abomination of Desolation. That is what it is called.
Right.
And that is who does that. If you know the story from the Bible, this is it happening, okay? Now, it gets fancified up in the Bible too, and they layer a lot of like stuff that probably didn't happen, but it would have the right effect on the people reading it later.
Yeah.
It would invoke the rage.
Yeah.
And it's tied to some interesting things. So anyway, he slaughters a pig on the altar. And then he goes about setting in place laws and prohibitions against Jewish law and religion, right? And so, burns Torahs and destroys their synagogues. He forces them to build temples to all these Greek gods, and then he forces them to daily sacrifice pigs on these altars. You see what he's doing to them. He's trying to demoralize them and beat them down because he's mad. And it's interesting because his father actually had a really good relationship with the Jews. Antiochus III sponsored building programs and projects in Jewish communities, exchanged information with them, considered them friends of the court, and largely he didn't even make them, the Jews, they're not, you have to understand, number 2 and number 3 on their top 10 list is don't fucking worship other gods and don't mess around with statues, idols, and images. So every time these empires like the Greeks or the Romans would come in saying like, what? We have something awesome. They're like, look, we've been thrashed through history, and the way that they interpret it was that we aren't serious enough. God's mad at us. So they get real serious. And it causes them to be this very segregated, insular, secretive to the outsiders. And that secrets and darkness always make room for us to like, woo, make up shit, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, and he even outlaws circumcision, which sounds weird to us in our modern sensibilities, but at this time, they were the only people that did it. I mean, it seems like there's evidence that maybe other people did, but in this area, this was a strange thing that nobody else did.
Yeah.
And why it's so important and why this is so bad, what he does is, I mean, the story, maybe people, you know the story, but maybe people who are listening don't know why circumcision is associated with, like, the Jewish religion. Back in Genesis, like 17, I think, weird that I know that still, this old man named Abram, God comes up on him, I don't know how, starts talking to him. Abram's 90 years old. He's married to an old lady who's also his age, and they have no children. But God says, hey, I got a deal for you. You are going to be the father of many nations, which was obviously a miracle. This dude's shooting blanks for years and years and years, right? His wife has also ceased to be of bearing years, right? You're going to have children not out your ass, but I mean, like, tons of children, many nations, and they're going to be my homies forever. You know, like, they're going to be God's people. Sounds good, right? And he's just like, fuck yeah. And he's like, so check this out, Abraham. I'm going to call you that, by the way, now. Abraham. He changes his name right there. He says, which is cooler, I guess. I don't know, but he's like, Abraham, here's the deal. I just need you to do one thing. One hitch. You have to cut some skin off your dick. That's literally how the discussion went. And you laugh, but if you just go and modernize it, that's what God said. He goes, here's the deal. Here's the covenant, the token of my promise to you. Cut off some skin from your dick.
It's so weird.
And so circumcision became the mark that they were God's people. And God even said, not only you cut off the skin off your dick.
Dick order. disorder that would make you make up that story.
You know, I have no
That would
idea.
make you,
I haven't said.
say that God has told me to cut skin off my dick.
Yeah.
What psychological disorder do you have?
Here's what's crazy is that guy goes on further to say, this is what he says. He says, not only that, but all the people with dicks from here on out from you have to cut skin off their dicks. And now this isn't going to age well, Abraham, but this is God speaking. If you buy a slave, because I'm into that and fine with it at this time as God, if you buy a foreign slave, got to cut some skin off his dick too. And you think about that little fun surprise, like say, well, I just got bought by this nice little short bearded man. I'm going to home with him. And then, the next thing is before he can come to my house, there's some dick skin cutting that's going to happen. So that was a very serious thing. He outlaws it. He not only outlaws it, but he says, if you're caught, the mom and the infant boy are going to be hung in public and just left there to die and rot. So this guy's a fucking asshole, right? And he's doing stuff that is out of hatred, right? For these people that have proven to be not ready to integrate and assimilate into society, which he took as an affront. But mostly it was fueled by his anger and kind of temper tantrum at being bitched out by Rome on his way.
Yeah, it was so weird. He got mad at Rome and took it out on the Jews.
Yeah, because they're the other.
Yeah.
They're the other.
They're just some people that he had access to do it too.
Yeah, because what he did is he reinstalled Hellenized Greeks into the temple, and he put the ultra extreme Hellenized Jews, Hellenized Jews, and he took the extreme, Greek Jews and put them as overseers to make sure these people all did it, right? So he was trying to fucking like squelch this culture that was refusing to become part of the empire or what have you, how he saw it. Okay, cool. You with me so far?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it was probably like, what's the dad hits the mom hits the kid hits the dog.
Stuff
the
like
power
that.
dropping down, right?
Yeah. Who's at the bottom?
Right.
These weirdos.
So he's pissed off at Rome,
Right.
and so he's going over the people that he has power to kick them.
Exactly.
Blah, blah, blah.
Exactly. And then other people, even within the Jewish community, are taking the opportunity to do the same thing. Like, I'm going to kick these people out to get me. So, first of all, I wanted to go through this to set the stage and context of this friction that has existed between prevailing cultures and the Jewish communities who, in large part, refuse to assimilate, even to the point of persecution and death. Okay, these people will come and say, just worship your God. We're fine with that. Just add ours in.
Yeah.
We're just saying, just do this. And they're like, no, to the point that either kill themselves to not fall into their hands or be killed, rather, right? So this is like, there's friction that forms in that. I'm not saying good or bad, but that causes friction, right? They saw their various exiles and captivities and punishments. We did something bad. That's why people keep ruling over us and we keep getting kicked out of places and stuff. They believed they had been thrashed for not being serious enough or detailed enough about following the Torah, and so they got real serious, hoping they can somehow regain God's favor and be restored. This intentional differentiation and self-segregation rubbed people the wrong way and angered rulers who were trying to build a cohesive society. Having these insolent weirdos who won't even just go through the motions and integrate led many rulers to lash out in hatred and superstitious bigotry. This is a long legacy with the Jewish people.
Okay, so I've always, I think a lot of people have wondered, why are the Jews getting so thrashed throughout history? So this is kind of like an explanation of a root, interaction that was happening in their psyche to make them resist, and the frustration of cultures around them wanting to just create peaceful cultures and it just exasperating its own self upon itself. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, this largely is, it's kind of like the Amish people. Now people read books, but for a large time, they were like fucking this mysterious thing. Who knows what the fuck they're doing in there? And people came up with all kinds of stuff they were doing in there. It just creates this kind of otherness. And we're going to see that otherness is way beyond what we even could comprehend when we think about someone being other, okay? And also, I wanted to tell that story to deal with that assertion by that guy Appian, right? This is the guy he's talking about. He's saying that Antiochus went into the temple, found a Greek prisoner who then informed him that he was being held there for sacrifice, right? And he was being sacrificed out of hatred for the Greeks, to destroy the Greeks, right? It was like a conspiracy to like take down the Greeks through these dark magical rituals or whatever. Now, again, there were some ideas, not this specifically, but there were ideas floating around of like, what are the Jews doing? You know, and they're just coming up with all kinds of theories.
Yeah.
Right. But Appian throws out this little historical anecdote like, well, Antiochus found one in the Jewish temple. The problem is, one, he would have used that, right? You don't just go like, oh, yeah, weird thing. I found this. No, you would have heard about it. No other contemporary source makes any mention of it. It's never really heard about. It's really only known because of, you know, scholarly work and uncovering these works and translating them in Appian's things. So it seems to kind of be like just propaganda that came out of a Greek who fucking also hated the Jews. Okay. And it doesn't really spread around. You don't see it like go viral, so to speak, or anything, right? It kind of is something that we know about now because of modern historical studies. Not because of its proliferation and it showed up everywhere and we just couldn't help but run into it. It wasn't like that, okay? But that is something that was written at that time in the 2nd century when this shit was going on. And I wanted to tell a story because understand that framework of just what happened, because it doesn't change. It doesn't matter if you're in the fucking desert, if you're in the Middle East, if you're in Egypt, if you're in Greece, if you're in fucking America, if you're in Europe. That same kind of thing is going to play out, and it's going to creep closer and closer to what we're dealing with. So if this isn't the root of the story, right, if this isn't the root of Blood Libel, the anti-Semitic trope that says that the Jews are ritualistically sacrificing children, drinking their blood for some purpose, right, conspiratorial purpose, it doesn't start here. So where does this perverse and pervasive accusation of blood libel really come from then? Where and why did it start? For that, we're going to have to jump forward to the Middle Ages, but first, we need to get a running start to fully understand the forces at work that lead to such ideas. Before we kind of trudge through like these kind of periods, we're going to kind of unfold as we go through the Middle Ages and see what develops and what's happening around this idea. We have to first like get some terms straightened out. Historically, you really see two different forms of Jewish persecution. Okay, persecution against the Jews, I should say.
Yeah.
The first is called anti-Judaism. Now, anti-Judaism is kind of like rooted in what you would call historical, I guess, ideas. It's like, you killed Jesus, you're not a Christian, so I can hate you. Anti-Judaism.
Yeah.
Right? Anti-Semitism, on the other hand, comes at this from a different perspective. It says the Jews aren't Christians, and the Jews are actively trying to destroy the faith and everything I hold dear. Anti-Semitism is about conspiracy.
Oh.
Okay? Anti-Judaism is, we don't like Jews because we're not Jewish. Anti-Semitism is, we don't like Jews, and they're trying to take away everything we like. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So in the early church period, most of the Christians were Jews. Okay?
Yeah.
Like Jesus, for instance. Even when you saw the popularity of the religion shift to the Gentiles, that was under Paul, if you know all this kind of shit, there was no real animosity between the Jews and Christians. And the Jews certainly were not afraid of them. They had no power, right? The Christians were underground, mostly lower class people doing secret little shit, meetings, you know, and stuff like that, right? They didn't have any power, so the Jews weren't like, we don't fucking care about the Christians. They're not going to scare us. Who cares?
Yeah.
They're weird, but we're not afraid of them. At the time, there was no real fascination with or bringing up of anything to do with the Jews killing Jesus either, right? That was not like an early thing that people latched onto. There wasn't widespread hatred in the church focused on this idea. In fact, the first mention of the idea of the Jews killing Jesus comes from a guy named Melito. He was the bishop of Sardis in the late 2nd century. He's responsible for coining terms like Old Testament. He came up with that. And he also produced one of the very first lists of Old Testament canonical books that were being considered to be included in like the official Bible that would eventually be rolled out. In one of his magical thinking diatribes, he stated, quote, "The Jews are guilty of killing Jesus." Still, though, this was not something that got picked up and spread around, really. It's just the first place that we see, like, a church leader go, like, "I'm going to fucking say it. The Jews killed Jesus," right? People didn't care about that. No one was really wondering about that. It wasn't really something they were focused on.
Yeah.
But he's the one that first popped that off, right? While Christianity gained immense worldly power throughout the 6th century, a lot of anti-Judaism was going on, leading to things like forced conversions, right? It was like, "You're not a Jew, convert." It wasn't like, "You're not a Jew, and where are you meeting?" And like, "What are you guys conspiring to do?" And you're going to like steal...
Forced conversions into Judaism?
To Christianity.
Oh.
No. Meaning the anti-Judaism was when they went after the Jews and forced them to convert to Christ.
Oh.
But there was no conspiracy theories around them being an evil cabal working to destroy the true faith. Prominent voices spoke out against the persecution of the Jews during this time even, and their voices proved to be more influential in the church at large. And so, while there were like people that were kind of leaning that way, I mean, to a large degree, the Bible, the reason they kind of formulated the Bible was they had to kind of quell some stuff that was going on. And one of the things going on was intense anti-Judaistic kind of ideas. And so the church is like, hey, let's not get crazy. We don't need to focus on, let's leave the Jews alone, right? Augustine in the early 5th century, he's a church father, Augustine of Hippo, super influential in the doctrines of Christianity, especially Catholicism, but equally also in the large degree to evangelical Christianity or Protestantism. Augustine in the early 5th century wrote that the Jews should be left alone in his doctrine of witness. Now, don't get it twisted. Like, he's not saying Jews are equal. What he's saying is, leave them alone and be nice to them because they make a really nice missionary field that we can go out and convert people to Jesus nicely, right? He kind of cast the Jews, and he needed them because there was a real need at this time to tie Jesus to Old Testament prophecies to give him cred, right? It's like he's an upstart religious figure. How do we give him ancient roots? And so the Old Testament kind of served as this prophetic material that they could reach way back into history to God's people and whatnot. So they needed the Old Testament. They couldn't fucking say the Jews were bad because that was their shit. So he kind of cast them in the role of like the older stepbrother that's forgotten and now moved on. The parent moved on to a new thing. It's kind of like with the program, God's moved on to Christianity. Right? So while the official doctrines of the church were highly influenced by Augustine, mistreatment of the Jews would still crop up and be practiced by the largely uneducated and superstitious populace, right? You can't stop people from being dumb. This leads to Pope Gregory the Great issuing a papal bull in 593 CE, which represents the first official order of protection for the Jews, calling for Christians to leave them alone in peace to live and worship as they please. Again, sounds nice, right? But he goes on to include, however, Jews are no longer allowed to be in any elected office or public, office. Like they can't hold any official position or be elected to any kind of governmental or any kind of community role. And they could not hold any kind of power of a Christian in any way. So they couldn't be in the military. They couldn't, they couldn't do all these things that had them authority over Christians. So leave them alone. But they're, less than.
I've heard that they were pushed out to the edges of society. They weren't allowed to participate as.
We'll get there. Yep. Even with these kind of backhanded favors, the next few centuries are marked by overall peace, calm, and even cooperation between Jewish and Christian communities. Throughout Europe, there's a wealth of evidence of collaboration, intermarriage, people switching sides from both teams, being like Christians becoming Jews and Jews becoming Christians. And it seemed like it wasn't a rare occurrence that friendships and partnerships and business and stuff kind of happened, right? Now, again, we need to get some historical and societal context here so we can get a feel for the situation and vibe that's happening in Europe when this is going to go down. In 1066, a guy named William the Conqueror sailed from Normandy to England to seize the crown, the throne. Now, it was called Normandy because they were called the Normans, which literally is the Northmen.
It became France, right?
Well, it's part of France. Yeah, exactly. France existed at this time. Normandy was a region down there, but it was its own kingdom. Now France encompasses what it used to be. Anyway, they were the Normans because they were literally the Scandinavians that came from the north and raided up and down the coast of Europe and Britain. We call them Vikings. That was the name for the act of raiding. They went a Viking. We call them Vikings, but they were the Scandinavians. They were the Northmen, the Norman, right? So they had decided, after doing this and they get to Europe, first of all, they came from Scandinavia. So they're like, this place is nicer, like you can grow shit here. It's pretty awesome. We don't have to like go steal everything. So they begin to settle down and adopt the ways of European Christendom, organize their kingdoms the same way. This is where we get dukes and knights of the chivalric role. This is where it comes from the Vikings that became chivalric European knights, okay? And they even adopted the religion of Christianity and gave themselves to Christ. This is where the Knights Templar come from, out of these regions, right? So in 1066, William the Conqueror, a Norman king, he goes over and fucks up England and takes the crown. They spoke French, the Normans.
Yeah.
They didn't speak English,
right?
The Anglo-Saxon rulers spoke English as well as the populace, the peasantry and stuff in England. So now the Normans come in and now they're ruling. The whole upper class, the whole, power structure speaks a language you don't fucking know and they don't speak your language.
Yeah.
Huge separation of classes, right? And just at a very basic level.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the Normans had really good relations with the Jews in Normandy. The Jews proved themselves to be active members of the community and the economy, and they didn't have any problems. And so what you saw is as Jews began to settle in Britain after this period, they settled in Norman neighborhoods and areas and around kind of the places where the upper class and kind of the powerful set were. Because they spoke French and they had good relationships, and there's a bunch of fucking hicks that don't speak languages that you know, and you're already a Jew.
Yeah.
Like they knew, they understood their legacy of like what could happen when people misunderstand who we are, right? And so they, again, you can see where this is laying the groundwork for like some intense kind of societal misunderstandings and issues and problems with each other. This caused some new societal issues. Now the upper class and royal court didn't even speak English like Anglo-Saxon rulers did. They spoke like French, like foo-foo talk, basically, like they're like flu blah blah blah, and people are like, oh my God, no. And so this drove deep divides between the peasantry and higher classes. We can see this in how many words in modern English came to be, right? So an easy way to look at this is food. Animals were raised by the lower classes. The Anglo-Saxons, for the most part, they spoke English. Meat was expensive, and only the rich could afford to eat it. Because of this, the names of animals being raised, meaning like pre-food animals, came to us from Old English roots. And so we say things like pig, cow, and chicken. Those are all from English roots. However, after you turn them into food, they turn into French words, pork, beef, and poultry. That's because only the rich French-speaking motherfuckers could eat this shit, so they named it. Meanwhile, the poor people raising it for them named the animals. Class warfare enshrined in our language, and it is all over there, okay? We think it's divided here, but we all speak the same language and have the same culture. I mean, there's differences, but we all have a pretty common experience. This is like wild, okay?
Yeah.
This is where your president gets up and speaks a foreign language that you don't know a word he's saying. You don't know what the fuck he's saying about you or what he's going to do. Like, this is, obviously going to create some societal problem. So, again, the Normans didn't mind the Jews, and they even had good relationships with them. But these deep divides would start to create some suspicions that were already there, but began to kind of like give them some intense shit. Because you see, back in 1026, so 40 years earlier, word had reached Europe that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre had been destroyed. Okay, now, if you don't know what the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is, back in the early 4th century, a guy named Constantine, who rose to become emperor of the Roman Empire, he converts to Christianity leading up to this anyway. It's this whole legendary story. Whatever. He converts however it happened to Christianity. His mom, Helena, goes a little nuts and fucking starts getting obsessed with finding all the real places the things happen from the Bible, right? And so she takes church leaders and Constantine sends her out, and she goes all over the fucking Holy Land saying, oh, this is where Moses did this, and oh, this is where this happened. And so they get to fucking, obviously, into Jerusalem, and they identify the spot of the Holy Sepulchre, right? And to this day, there is a church here. Now, the story of how they identified it is hilarious. It's basically went like this. They rolled into town, found what they thought to be a tomb, looked around, found 3 crosses in the corner, still there 300 years later. They just piled the 3 crosses apparently in the corner of the room or whatever bullshit they were looking at. Decided that, I think we're in the right spot. And so they start destroying the temple of Jupiter that had been built over the spot, because that happened. The Christians, they got fucked up too by Rome. And so Rome had already destroyed their shit once and put a temple to Jupiter over some spot. And so they found a tomb, and they figured that we found it. This is Jesus' tomb, right? And so they built a Church of the Holy Sepulchre over there. Now, this was a graveyard. It's kind of like, what do you find when you build shit over? It's like building a mall over a graveyard. If you dig underneath it, you're going to find fucking graves, right? That's what happened. There's obviously no historical truth to this, but this was a holy site in Christendom. And I know, like, we think Christianity now was like really like, oh, they believe in stuff. These people believed. Like, they didn't have a lot of the understanding that we have of the world. So these holy sites were like deeply entrenched, and we have these people now, but I mean like deeply, deeply held, right? So they get word that, oh fuck, someone's destroyed it? The place where our holy Lord laid after the crucifixion and rose from the dead from, and all this shit. They're fucking freaking out. And it actually was destroyed. Like, that's the thing. It's like, it wasn't like, oh no, it wasn't destroyed. It was, but it was actually destroyed 17 years earlier. This is a time before the internet, right? So it takes a while. So in 1026, they hear, oh man, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre has been fucking destroyed. In reality, it had been destroyed, but it was almost 2 decades earlier. And it was actually destroyed by what is referred to and believed to be the very first Muslim extremist. His name was Fatimid Khalif al-Hakim bi Amar Allah, which, that's a mouthful. His own people referred to him as the Mad Caliph, or the Nero of Islam. So this guy was a fucking, he truly was the first Muslim extremist, right?
Yeah.
And he actually did go about destroying all these things. So what does that have to do with the Jews, though? Well, unfortunately, as word comes in, there's this guy. His name is Rudolphus Glaber. He's a Cistercian monk. Now, the Cistercian order has long been a very anti-Semitic place, breeding ground, and he was no different. And so Rudolphus seized upon an opportunity. He decided to insert, we know he did this, by the way, he decided to insert a little detail that not only was it destroyed by the fucking Muslims, the Jews helped them. Okay, because he saw an opportunity that we do something about this Jewish problem way over here if I fucking turn the tide here.
Yeah.
So this leads to the expulsion of the Jews from southern France, with some historical sources recounting stories of Jews who took their own lives and the lives of their children rather than fall into the hands of Christians. So that had kind of broken out in Europe in 1026. Word coming out saying, hey, fucking the Jews sided with the Muslims and destroyed the holy sites of our Lord, whatever, and they fucking start killing Jews, right? Well, they chase them out, but they kill them along the way.
Yeah.
So as the Turks continued to take territory, which was once part of the Eastern Roman Empire, European kings began to get restless and feel action needed to be taken in the name of Christ, and also in the name of them holding land.
Yeah.
They approached Pope Urban II, calling for him to call for an official crusade to take back the land they had lost, and especially the Holy Land. The reason they needed the Pope to weigh in on this was because traveling from Europe to Palestine with all the stuff and men you need to fight a battle is incredibly expensive and personally costly. Most were not going to be super eager to join the movement. However, if the Pope was the one calling for it, and he throws in total absolution for all who fight to reclaim the Holy Land, now people are more likely to throw themselves into the fight. And so in 1095, the Pope calls for the First Crusade. He says, hey, you're forgiven of all sins if you go and do this. God will do whatever from now on. Like, this is gnarly, right? That's how you motivate people. And so he calls the First Crusade. Now, understand, life was miserable for common people at this time. On top of that, they had an unquestioned belief in the words of people telling them that are hopelessly evil, deserve hell, always are in danger of damnation unless you do everything right and give us the right amount of your money. all while those in power are constantly changing the rules. That was the reality of their life.
Yeah.
There's this magic guy who might love or hate you at any moment. And the church, by the way, is the sole arbiter of what he wants to do. And, we'll just change that however it is that we want it, So this was an unstable time to be alive, right? And so when someone comes along and says, hey, you go do this, you will feast and party in heaven forever. You'd be like, fucking kill me. I'll do that right now, right? Because it wasn't like you had a lot to live for anyway. I mean, to a large degree. Not totally, but I mean, to a large degree, that was what was going on. So in 1096, the First Crusade is launched. A vast army of knights, infantry, and cavalry traveled east. And by 1099, though their numbers had been decimated, they had been successful in fighting their way through enemy cities and strongholds, even laying siege to Jerusalem, finally capturing it on July 15th, 1099. The Christian forces went about slaughtering Muslims and Jews alike, fueled by the belief that the two were both working together as enemies of the one truth faith. Back in Europe, as the Crusader knights were leaving on their mission, the people who longed to do battle for Christ but could not go were looking for their own way to gain spiritual favor through battling the church's enemies, right? They're like, no fair. I'm too old, I'm too poor, I'm too crippled, I'm too whatever. Disabled, sorry. Differently abled, sorry. I don't know what to say. I can't go. It's no fair. I want to fucking get absolution for my sins too. And so they launch what's called the People's Crusade, which is it's like the people we see marching through the streets with guns to, do the thing that the police are supposed to do, but they're not the police, that kind of thing, right? They're trying to do their own crusading. So they undertook the People's Crusade, menacing and murdering Jews in places like Western Germany, with their battle cries claiming they were killing the Jews to avenge the murder of Christ. Now, at this point in history, any long-term peaceful coexistence with Christianity and the Jewish communities that resided in the countries that was ruled by it comes to an end, and things progress instead in terrible directions. And so up to this point, things have been fairly peaceful, okay? But the Crusades represented a thing that largely ignited almost like a public furor over that. It's interesting when you think about like that story of Antiochus Epiphanes and his dad being tolerant of the Jews.
Yeah.
Look what happens when you have a shift at the top.
Yeah.
And you already, there were the people and the common people already had a lot of hatred and bigotry and stuff towards the Jews. And as soon as that shifted at the top, as soon as the top said, we can hate Jews, you see those things bubble to the top and these start. That's what's happened the last 4 years in this country. Kind of what's going on here during the Crusades too.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, now it's okay
Yeah.
because the Jews are, and we're in this holy crusade and God's on our side because he's going to forgive us all our sins. So it's like good that I do this. And now they get to lean into their hatred and shit.
Yeah.
That's really just base human tribalism, but they get this magic justification for it now. Now with all that background, we come to the year 1144, finding ourselves in the town of Norwich, England. It was a successful city, complete with a cathedral, a thriving economy, and some prominence, really. There's also a small but thriving community of Jews living in Norwich. They lived in areas near the Norman upper classes, like was their, kind of their way, and had good relations with the representatives of the crown there in town. In a time of heightened tensions between Christians and Jews in light of the Crusades, the local peasantry had a lot of animosity towards these people whom they saw as completely other. And I don't think you understand how other these people believed the Jews to be. It was common belief at this time that Jews had a foul, unnatural odor. Horns grew on their heads that they had to conceal. They had diabolical features that you shouldn't look at, and other fantastical ideas that painted them as demonic, essentially. Also, remember, their dicks looked totally different, making them other in this really primal sense. Even sexually, at this base animalistic sense, it's like they're not human. Their ideas were so crazy that it was actually widespread belief that Jewish men menstruated every month, with some even claiming that the men would need to then drink blood to replenish after their periods.
So
I don't know what they thought their wives were doing after their periods, but I mean, like apparently the Jews had to drink blood because these men were doing something unnatural, not like normal humans.
Right.
So the stage was basically set for some wacky ass shit to go down, right, with this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Not like that's crazy. This is common This is what they talk about and think is going on, right?
That's crazy.
Now, there's this insular community who don't speak their language, who do very weird things, and don't eat the things they eat. I mean, so they have a lot of room to kind of fucking fantasize, right? And so it was on Friday before Easter in 1144, a young Christian boy's body was found in Thorpe Wood, just outside of town, and an investigation ensued. Now, I have to lay out a caveat here. There is really only one source for this story, and it's in no way an unbiased or completely trustworthy kind of set of accounts. Okay, it's kind of like facts intermingled with invention. We'll get to who's responsible for it in a little while because he's the main antagonist of the story, but there are some details that historians believe paint a fairly accurate timeline, and parts of the narrative seem to be based on actual events, even if they are given some supernatural flourishes in some cases. This account was written with a very clear intention that is very clear to understand now, especially looking at it historically. It very clearly was being constructed to do something. However, it does, after they've kind of looked through this and compared other contemporary evidence and information, I'm going to first give you kind of the timeline that we think probably happened, at least close to it, right? And then we'll get into what some other shit that goes in here. The body of the boy was first discovered by a nun who was passing by, returning home from visiting lepers. She claimed to have been guided to his body by supernatural light, of course. She also stated that he was only wearing a jacket and shoes. Yikes, that's it. She also claimed that carrion were feasting on his flesh, but it refused to be corrupted. Apparently, she just walks away rejoicing at this miracle and didn't tell a soul about the dead kid in the woods. What the fuck? Okay, so first person to come across the body, a nun. She's so pumped that these birds and animals can't seem to take a chunk out of this young boy. She just thinks it's a miracle and just goes home and forgets the whole thing. Next, a forester named Sprouston happened upon the body. He claims that the boy's head had been shaved and that there were head wounds apparent. He also reports that he saw a strange device shoved into the boy's mouth. This would later be identified as a teasel, which is a metal and wooden comb or brush used in the production of fabric. This kid had been tortured, and if literally hundreds of hours of watching true crime, sex murders, and serial killers has taught me anything, there's likely some kind of sexual component to this murder, right? It's a naked kid, tortured. Yeah. Something ugly went down. Yeah. Sprouston leaves the scene, telling no one of it at all. He just goes home, only to return on Monday, at which time he buries the body right there where he laid. So he comes back 3 days later, buries him in a shallow grave right where he sat. Okay? Middle Ages, man. Different time to be alive, Who the fuck are these people? It's crazy. So someone unknown to the available record must have stumbled upon the body because on Tuesday, it's reported that a group of relatives go to the site, dig up the body, and identify him as William, a 12-year-old nephew and cousin to this group. William had been missing since the Tuesday before Easter. He had last been seen leaving his family's house with a man claiming to be a cook for the archbishop. Apparently, this man had approached William, offering him some work in the archbishop's service, and the two had gone to get permission from William's mother. William did not actually live at home. He had been apprenticed to a skinner at age 8 and actually lived with his aunt and uncle closer to where he apprenticed, and they kind of factor prominent in the story, his aunt and uncle. They were kind of his guardians, though he still would visit his parents clearly because they show up in the story too. So it was this uncle who had gone out and found his nephew murdered and mangled, right? The uncle he lived with. And so he runs home and informs his wife, and she proceeds to tell him of a nightmare she had recently. She was in the marketplace and became encircled by Jews who proceeded to beat her with clubs, eventually ripping one of her legs off. She reminds her husband of this dream, interpreting it as a prophecy that she would lose something dear to her at the hands of the Jews, and insisting that it is enough proof to know who did this horrible crime. A few days later, William's father is standing in front of the bishop's palace screaming public accusations against the Jews for his son's murder. He leans heavily on the dream prophecy and expresses a lot of common bigoted beliefs about the Jews at the time. He suggests that the cunning and devious actions of the man who took William shows he must be a Jew. He's so cunning. No one can be so cunning. He also brings up fanciful ideas of Jewish rituals, drawing attention to the torturous wounds his son had endured. This got the bishop's attention, leading him to officially call for the Jewish leadership to present themselves to the ecclesiastical court for questioning. Obviously, they did not trust Catholic justice in a world where they are the enemy of Christ. So they sought out the intervention of the crown by taking the matter to the sheriff. Smart, right? It's like, hey, Jews that we don't like and think killed our Lord and Savior, come here, we want to ask you something. Come in and let us lock the doors behind you. It's like, fuck off. So they go to the sheriff. The sheriff advises them not to submit to the church for judgment or proceedings, instead giving them shelter and protection under the king in the Norwich castle until the outcry subsided. 1 month after the initial discovery, the bishop orders men to dig up William's body and move him to the cathedral grounds. They wash his body and make note of his injuries, or at least their perspective on them. They claimed his skin was burnt off as if by boiling water. There are wounds present on one of his hands, one of his feet, and there appears to be several wounds on his head. They conclude naturally that he had been inflicted with the wounds of Jesus Christ. Understand, this is the body of a boy who had spent some time in the woods, attracting all kinds of scavengers, steadily decomposing. The nun's story aside, the boy was certainly in pretty rough shape at this point. He's then buried 3 days later in what is likely a shallow grave, leading to more scavenging, and then there's 30 more days rotting, infested with maggots and other corpse-eating insects, and yet somehow these Middle Ages monks are able to perform a post-mortem autopsy and come to conclusions around the cause of his death. Right? It's ridiculous, but we're going to find out there's a reason why there's something real going on here. Rumors begin to spread that the Jews actually bribed the sheriff, who betrayed his God and fell in league with the devious Jews. This allowed them to demonize both the Jews and the Norman rulers who are too cozy with them and probably working with them, right? So remember, they already had this division between the Normans who spoke French and kind of represented this invading force that took over their country and rules over them.
Yeah.
And then you got the Jews. So now they're able to demonize them all. The sheriff just got bribed, but, you know, whole deal. The results of the official investigation don't find any evidence pointing to the Jewish community, and they conclude the case without finding out who actually did it, and they don't punish anyone for this murder, right? And that's kind of the gist of the historical narrative, more or less, as we know it, okay, how it kind of came to pass in the normal world. 5 years go by without resolution. The world kind of moves on, but the hate-fueled conspiracies about Jewish involvement simmered under the surface amongst the Anglo-Saxon Christian population. So at this time, a young, hip new monk arrived, transferred to serve in Norwich Cathedral by the church. His name was Thomas of Monmouth, and he would seize upon this opportunity to accomplish very earthly goals, and in the process set in motion dark ideas that would implant in the European mind, resulting in millions of innocents murdered and the spreading of this bigotry into the New World and beyond. Norwich was a good post, a bustling economy and city with a cathedral. They even had some relics and objects associated with various saints. There was just one claim to fame they didn't have. They didn't have a saint's body. That's what you need to have a patron saint. And that's a big deal because patron saints create like guilds, choose them to sponsor them, or they create pilgrimages. And so you kind of raise in prominence in the church. You get more donations. Your economy's stimulated. You know, it's a big deal having a saint. And they didn't have one. You know, they had pieces and parts. They had relics of various saints that people would come. But, I mean, it didn't, like, bring in, like, the numbers, right? Thomas heard wind of the boy's murder from years ago and saw exactly what he would need to make this happen. His work, The Life and Miracles of St. William of Norwich, provides the only material in existence around these events and how things unfolded, okay? So you can see his motivation is already set.
He's making the boy a saint?
Right. Well, he's going to try, right? Because that's what this church needs. It opens up way more powerful opportunities for him. If he's at a church that's like prominent, then he's, you know, going to rise. So Norwich had actually attempted to obtain a patron saint a few times before, but had failed at every attempt. You needed a couple of things to make this happen. First, you needed the dead body of the martyr, or at least most of it. This is undoubtedly a difficult hurdle to begin with, but they had that part locked down, right? And then next, you need some confirmed miracles directly tied to contact with the dead believer, usually involving going to the cathedral and visiting the grave. You need to develop a cult around these figures in order to get the church's official recognition, right? So it's not enough to say he was. You have to have like the documentation, right? You got to the report.
Morbid and weird.
It's so crazy. Okay, so Thomas already knew the young boy's body had been moved to the cathedral and even relocated with the grounds at least once, each time resulting in pilgrims flocking in, reporting and sharing stories of miraculous healings and deliverances due to William's holy martyrdom. This could be exactly what Norwich Cathedral needed, right? So they moved the body from the woods to the cathedral. And at that time, people came and visited all this, the Christian boy, the praying and all this shit. And it generated some you know, attention.
Hmm. Hmm.
Well, then they moved it again, from the grave, from the cemetery, basically, into the cathedral
Hmm.
itself. And again, people came. And so Thomas knew, like, okay, there's already kind of a little vibe going around this
Hmm.
kid. People saying they've been healed and shit like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. There was also something else going on that needed to be addressed. 2 years after the death of William, around 1146, a prominent Jewish moneylender was murdered in Norwich. His name was Eleazar. So remember, in 1144 is when William's body is found,
Hmm.
right? He's murdered in
Hmm. Hmm.
1144. 2 years later, a murder also happens in town of a Jewish man. His name was Eleazar, and he was
Hmm.
a very prominent and kind of upper class. He was a rich guy. He was a
Hmm.
moneylender. It quickly became obvious that the crime was committed at the behest of a local knight who owed Eleazar a lot of money. Crusading was expensive business, forcing most to borrow a ton of money to go out on campaign. The thing is, since Christians were forbidden from charging interest, Jews filled that void since they had no such religious prohibition. Add to this the fact that they weren't allowed to have a lot of jobs besides skilled trades and money lending, and the result was that money lending became a very Jewish industry. It wasn't uncommon for Christian knights to return home from slaughtering Jews as the enemy of Christ, only to have to face a different Jew at home who was demanding repayment for the money he lent to the knight
That's so
in order to
wild.
go kill his own people.
Yeah. Wild.
Sticky situation. The knight had Eleazar killed for this reason. Everyone knew it, even the ecclesiastical court knew it. However, the trial had dragged on, and as the churchmen stalled and tried to find any way to get the Christian out of this, it would be bad press to punish a knight for killing a Jew after we just told him he is forgiven for all his sin because he went over and killed Jews. That's confusing and hard to keep people on message when you're being evil and manipulative, right? Thomas came up with an idea, one that not only would get the case for William's sainthood on the main stage, but would also serve as a clever legal tactic to get this Christian knight off for the murder. Thomas presents his life and miracles of William Norwich as evidence in court, claiming to have uncovered new details of the murder based off of his own investigation and interviews with the main witnesses and subjects. Okay, so this thing would be added to more than once. We know that, right? Like, this was over
Hmm.
time he's developing this.
Hmm.
For instance, the testimony of the aunt changed drastically, claiming that William and the man he left with actually visited her home also the next day. Thomas relays that she was so suspicious of the devious seeming man, she sent her young daughter to follow them, which is crazy to me. It's like, I think
That sounded
William's in
really bad.
trouble. Who should I send? Come here, little girl. Like, what the fuck? Anyway, she now claims that when her daughter returned, she reported that the two had entered, quote, the house of a Jew. Apparently, William's aunt just kept these details to herself, as there's no corroboration in official records of the church or crown that include any of these statements. He also introduces an array of new characters. He claims to have found a Christian maidservant who had worked for a Jew during the Easter season of 1144. This was actually a common practice at the time in Europe. Young Christian women would be employed by Jewish families as wet nurses and maids and all kinds of different, just household kind of chore type things.
Hmm.
This would end 35 years later when the Third Lateran Council made it illegal for Jews to employ Christian service, fearing that the young women were just too impressionable to be around such a corrupting influence. She says that she was asked to boil a pot of water, and when she brought it to her employer, she was able to peek through a crack in the door, seeing a young boy fixed to a post inside. Again, remember the when they washed the body and they
Hmm.
said he looked like he was burnt with boiling water?
Hmm.
Well, now we got that little tale
Hmm.
wrapped up. You can see how he's reverse engineering this
Yeah.
story, right? The name of the man she worked for? Eleazar. So wildly coincidental, right? So basically he's saying, like, in fact, I've heard that it was Eleazar who killed this young boy, like in his trial of this man's murder. Especially since Eleazar's dead and can't defend himself, this is
Yeah.
like really, really easy way to do it. Thomas even claimed to have visited the scene of the crime with the maidservant, who pointed out evidence which was still there 6 years later, as if it had just happened. Things like nail holes in a post where Thomas surmised William must have been crucified, and even a belt and knife that the maidservant claimed were William's and missing from his body when it was found, still hanging on a hook in the house. This is 5 years after the murder of William and 3 years after the murder of Eleazar. We're supposed to believe that nobody moved into this house, or cleaned it at least. Let's suppose they are guilty. Nobody got rid of the evidence. They just left it there for 5 years. I thought these were super cunning and devilishly crafty people, right? It's like, what the fuck? But people are so taken and biased and us versus them that they just believe that doesn't even cross their mind. It's just like QAnon, right? There's so many logical inconsistencies you can point out, but that's not ever going to stand out, right?
Yeah.
He totally flips it and reverses it when he gets around the fact that the monks reported puncture wounds on only the left hand and the left foot. He claims that the Jews are so devilishly good at this kind of evil shit that they made sure to only nail one side of the boy's limbs to the post, tying the other hand and foot so as not to draw attention to it being crucifixion. Yeah. When Thomas asked the maidservant why she kept a secret all these years and told no one, he reports that it was because she was afraid to lose her job to the Jew. I'm like, what the fuck? She wanted to lose her job. So she didn't talk about this boy being tortured in the home of the Jewish man Eleazar, who she worked for. You with me so far?
Yeah.
This is what's going on. Again, this is all stuff Thomas is thrown in the mix and presenting into court as evidence in the trial of Eleazar's killer.
Yeah.
Who is the knight, and not the knight, but his squires did it, but he ordered it, and everyone knows it.
Yeah.
Like, everybody knows it, right? Another source that suddenly shows up is a monk that had been reporting miracles being performed by William's corpse. He was like the guy who was assigned to get like content for Thomas, right? Like, go out there and find some. Let me know what's going on. The word on the street around William and miracles, right? All of a sudden, this monk lets out the fact that he had actually given last rites to a guy named Aelwood Dead, which is an awesome name. On his deathbed, on Dead's deathbed, he confesses that back in March of 1144. Again, Easter season, 1144, he had come across some Jews on horseback in Thorpe Wood. Conveniently, he recognized one of them as Eleazar. He noticed that they were carrying a large bag with a heavy, awkward load. He approaches them and gets close enough to touch it, at which point he knew it was a body. The Jews take off, but Mr. Dead is soon visited by the sheriff, telling him to keep his mouth shut if he knows what's good for him, clearly bribed by the Jews. Dead keeps the secret his entire life, only spilling the beans to unburden his guilt as he slipped away from this mortal coil. So, he introduces this little bit of testimony. Again, the guy's dead. Dead is dead. And Dead can't be brought in to corroborate this.
Yeah.
It's just this fucking dude who desperately needs a patron saint for his cathedral and to get this guy off for murder. Probably the most significant and damning information comes from several converted Jews. In his book 1, he says several converted Jews have corroborated this stuff he's about to tell us. But in book 2, I think he figured out it's too hard to come up with several different testimonies. So he narrows it down to one converted Jew, a monk named Theobald. Possibly a real person named Theobald of Cambridge, but possibly completely made up by Thomas. Historians are kind of divided on that. So check out this guy's backstory. Theobald lets Thomas in on a secret. For centuries, cursed by God for the murder of Jesus, the Jews have been required to perform blood rituals, required to yearly sacrifice a child both as a condition of their curse and to earn spiritual favor, which they believe will result in them being restored to the Holy Land and once again free, their enemies destroyed. They needed it to be a Christian child because it must be done in, quote, scorn and contempt of Christ. Remember back when they were sacrificing the Greek? In hatred of the Greeks, right? It's kind of the same thing. Again, it's a cultural thing that's happening. He goes on to detail how all the Jews in the world decide who is going to perform this sacrifice each year. Because you got to ask yourself, how many people are being murdered? Well, it's just one. Well, how do they figure that out in all the world?
Before the internet, all the Jews of the world communicated.
How do they do this? Well,
decided
no,
together.
they did. Listen.
Oh.
Okay, listen. Oh, my God. This is so crazy. Turns out, leaders from all the communities of the Jews would gather in Narbonne, France, where they would cast lots. Now, This was not a time where a lot of lots were being cast, but that added that biblical edge, and especially when the lots don't have a very positive aspect in the Bible. It's usually like some kind of like dark kind of thing. So they're casting lots to decide what country, and then once they decide the country,
And we've heard of this casting lots, but explain. It's like
I mean, it was a
dice.
real ancient thing. It's basically essentially analogous to dice, but it was a set of tiles typically, or some kind of objects that you would cast, and the different combinations of the colors or the marks or whatever would mean, just like we play dice or any other games. It's kind of like drawing straws, right? It's just culturally a different way. So he goes on to detail that they would pick the country, and then the people representing the largest cities of that country, they would all cast lots, and they would determine the actual community of Jews that was going to be responsible for doing this and appeasing their dark lord so they can someday get back to the Holy Land, right? Theobald just so happened to be in Narbonne at the meeting in the room when Norwich was chosen in 1144, right? So this motherfucker, he knew. Zero evidence that this ever happened, of course, but notice this is not anti-Judaism. This is not bigotry due to misunderstandings about their cultural and rituals. This is made up of stuff about them working a coordinated dark conspiracy in opposition to the cause of Christ and Christendom.
Yeah.
This is anti-Semitism, right?
Yeah.
After the sacrifice was carried out, Theobald visited Norwich and headed to the grave of the boy he knew had been ritually murdered by his own people. While there, he hears of the miracles happening around the body of William, falls to his knees, repents for being a part of such an evil conspiracy, converts to Christ, and becomes a monk. Okay, so his source is like this hero who was, it's kind of like in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, you would have people show up in your church who were like, I was once a satanic high priest. I was a part of a witch's coven.
Yeah.
They weren't ever
Yeah.
and had nothing to do with it, but it kind of brings that, so he's like saying like this guy was in the dark shit, turned to the light side. Who's going to have better information? Of course he's telling us the truth. So as the damning evidence was presented to the court, it ended with a dramatic, effective, and powerfully delivered closing argument by the bishop. His message to the ecclesiastical body was essentially, we can't even think of holding this brave, chivalrous soldier who laid his life on the line to battle in the name of Christ responsible for the death of a Jew until we hold the Jews responsible for the conspiratorial ritual murder of the Christian boy William of Norwich. So basically, it becomes not only a chance for Thomas to get his story and his campaign in front of the ecclesiastical body and get it kind of in top of mind, but it's a great legal tactic to give them the justification to let this guy go, because that's what they want to do, right? Is this jamming with you here? Okay. So it totally worked. The court lost interest and eventually left the matter unresolved. His account, presented as truth, existing alongside the stories of miracles that must also be true, is now in the official record and at the forefront of the church's mind. What Thomas could not have imagined was the impact this tactic would have as it reverberated throughout the centuries that lay ahead. He may have just been trying to put together a case for a patron saint in Norwich, motivated by very mundane and worldly desires, and he may have later just been trying to promote the case for William to be that saint by having his tale featured in a high-profile case. And he might think it's just one case in Norwich, who cares? It doesn't matter how local he thought this was. It wound up spreading and evolving throughout Europe and eventually the world. In fact, it was only about 20 years later in France that the first government-backed murder of Jews took place based on the conspiracy that Jews were ritualistically killing Christian children. So you might be asking yourself, but where does the actual drinking of blood come in, right? We haven't seen that.
This is just interesting to me. Wondered why the worldwide hatred of Jews, or at least the world that I'm in, the Western world, is this is explaining where anti-Semitism is rooted and comes from, and as a Christian, when I was a Christian, I had this oh, why does everybody hate God's people? It must be just because they hate God, and so they're against his chosen people just to be against God. And they're just clueless.
Yeah.
All throughout my Christianity, even until I was out of Christianity, clueless until I'm listening to this breakdown.
Right. And in large part, in the West, it has been a function of the Christian religion to demonize. Now, I say that, I should say Christian culture.
Christian culture,
If they're
because
cultures and not, yeah.
our culture is based in it. People that don't
Right.
even practice
Right.
Christianity or
Right.
believe in it have these ingrained programs and ideas, because our culture in America, but our culture rooted back into Europe.
Right. Because it's like it's a thing that has happened to them in all cultures. However, our culture is deeply rooted in the Christendom of European culture. Basically, we are an extension of and development of that. Sure, we have our own twist on it, but it's largely foundational in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
So you might be asking yourself, but where does the actual drinking of blood come in, right? So William was killed, but there's no mention in it of like they were consuming his blood or doing anything. He was just ritually murdered. They went with the angle of he was given the wounds of Christ in a mock crucifixion that they, of course, were doing because they hate Jesus and killed him. And so, and this was all done, because of some ancient scriptures that they have that they've cleverly hidden from everyone that says that if they do this, they'll be restored to the Holy Land. Remember, what was going on at this time? The Crusades for Europe to take back the Holy Land.
Yeah.
And so, again, there's that hook of like just modern day troubles being turned into the shit.
Yeah.
The evolution of the Blood Libel conspiracy happened due to developments in church dogma that were occurring also at this time. The first accusation of Jews not only crucifying and torturing children, but also consuming their blood was in Germany in 1235. The claim was that they were draining the children's blood and baking it into their matzah crackers, right, for their Passover. Why the fuck would they all of a sudden add that intense detail, though? That seems crazy. Well, about 20 years earlier, Pope Innocent III called the Fourth Lateran Council. A huge development happened during this council. The Pope elevated a doctrine that had been floating around and debated in the church for centuries. It was referred to as the mystery of the Eucharist and proposed that when the priest blessed the bread and wine of communion, it mysteriously, magically, and literally became the actual blood and flesh of Jesus.
Oh, yeah. What's that called?
It was a process called transubstantiation. Right.
Yes.
Good one. Innocent III declared that this was now official dogma of the church for all believers. So, dogma and doctrine are two different things. Doctrines of the church are debated. Dogma in the church is not. That is spoken from the seat of Peter. That is as if God himself spoke it through his human representative. And so when he elevates transubstantiation, which had been an idea that people had been talking about, but not seriously, and it certainly hadn't become like universally accepted. Well, now it's like, it's the fact, Jack. Get with the program. It's fucking true, right? So now something only discussed in certain circles and regions was now brought into the mainstream, and by the end of the 12th century, the drinking of blood was firmly rooted in the consciousness of Christians as they took communion. They're like, I'm eating a person and drinking blood for real because this dude said it.
Oh, okay.
I love when everyone's asked, like, how does that happen? They go like, it's a mystery, man. It's a mystery.
Yeah.
Just don't question it.
Yeah.
You thinking about it?
God works
Don't
in
think about it.
mysterious ways.
That's what it is. You
His
thinking
ways
about it?
are higher than our ways.
Don't think about it.
Don't question.
It just happens. As time went on, branches of the blood libel would develop. The first instance of what is known as host desecration occurred in 1247. This conspiracy removed the need for a Christian child to be murdered. They had been given a perfect analog with transubstantiation. Since the Eucharist is the actual flesh and blood of Jesus Christ, they can satisfy their need for Christian blood from the ultimate source. So if the cracker is baby Jesus, essentially, they can kill a Christian baby by attacking. So it was a psychological way to remove that kind of gross, disturbing factor of child murder and putting it into the Eucharist, because that is child murder, essentially, because it is the body of Jesus. You're murdering him. It's weird, but trust me, you're looking at me like, what? This is exactly what went on. Stories emerged and evolved about Jews breaking into churches in order to desecrate the true body of Christ represented by a bunch of crackers. Some stories had the Jew trying to feed it to his dog, only to have the dog refuse it and bow down in worship to the tasty snack.
Oh, the lovely story.
Others claimed the evil Jew would boil some water and throw the cracker in, only to watch it magically turn into an indestructible baby Jesus. Now, that was a real thing, and I don't know if they mean it looked like the shape of, or were there a bunch of baby Jesuses all over the place that we can't destroy, by the way, which is a problem. if you got a baby problem. The accusation that really hits all the high notes and is probably the most famous example happened in Paris in 1290. It was said that a Jew had maliciously stolen the Eucharist from the church in order to desecrate it. First, he stabs it, but rather than bust into pieces, it begins bleeding the actual blood of Christ, filling the bowl he had placed it in. He freaks out, so he throws it in the fire, but it just rises out of the fire, totally unburnt. Next, he tries boiling water. Again, the cracker just floats up out of the water, completely intact and totally unharmed. So now he's totally afraid at the power this cracker represents. So he carefully sneaks the Eucharist back into the bag of a lady he knows goes to the same church that he stole it from. Catholic Church records no longer mention the fact that he is a Jew in their records, but they do give his name, Jonathus, the Frenchified version of Jonathan, a Jewish name. This is a Jewish man. This is in their fucking good stuff. Okay, they're saying this is a good story, that this evil Jonathus, a Jew, right? So now this is how they refer to him now, though. Instead of saying Jew, they substitute this: a non-believer who harbored animosity toward the faith and who did not believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. I'm like, hey, that's me. But that all just equals Jew, and they tried to scrub that little detail. A year later, the Catholic Church seized his house, turning it into a chapel to house the holy relic of the supposedly magic cracker, complete with a display showing the knife he supposedly used to stab it with. It is, to this day, called the House of Miracles, and it sits on a street by the name of Rue de Dieu Boilly or some bullshit, which translates to Boiled God Street. The street is named after an anti-Semitic story that was made up out of hatred of the Jews. To this day, they celebrate this definitely fake event created using deeply anti-Semitic bigotry and beliefs on the second Saturday of Advent and Lent every fucking year. Okay?
What's the holiday called?
No, I don't fucking know. Some holiday of the miracles, or I don't know, some nonsense. Jew-hating Cracker Day.
Yeah.
I don't know. Now, host desecration really stuck. It was way less gross when you substituted a magic cracker for an actual real-life child. It also, logistically made more sense, because one thing about the current conspiracies around these child murders, they'll be saying, and this is the same thing that happened in the Satanic Panic in the 80s and 90s, hundreds of thousands of babies are going missing and being ritually sacrificed. We would spot that, right? Yeah. If we lost 100,000 babies right now, people would know.
People would know.
Okay? So having to always have them still children created a problem in a way, because you had, now, just like in the Dungeons & Dragons episodes, children being found murdered, which was happening back then by sexual sadists and fucking pedophiles and all kinds, just like we have today. Don't think they were any different, and the same bullshit wasn't happening. They were able to pin it on the Jews, just like we were able to pin it on Satan in the 80s and 90s when kids commit suicide.
And letting the real murderers go.
Yeah, but it did create a need that was not that easy or common, right? And so the cracker made a really good switch over, right? And so now it's like, they hate Jesus because they're stabbing him, and the whole deal. This would lead to extreme periods of violence toward the Jews throughout the 13th and 14th century. In 1346, the plague hits Europe hard. They had just made it through a brutal famine. It would lay waste to the population, with estimates putting the death rate at 1 in 3. Can you imagine that? The end of the world was here in the minds of everyone. Some battle between good and evil was in full gear, and dark forces were clearly working to destroy the Christian faith. Digging into deep-held anti-Semitism, they began blaming wandering Jews, a new bigoted trope that hits the scene at this time, still a trope by the way, for secretly poisoning the wells of Christians to make them sick and kill them. Conspiracy, right? This is anti-Semitism. The fact that the Jews had a much lower rate of infection due to their hygienic and nutritional laws only fed this belief. In reality, however, many, many Jews died horribly of the plague right alongside Christians. However, conspiracy requires us to ignore conflicting info and confirm our bias. So that is exactly what they did. Jews were expelled from France, Spain, and Portugal in the coming years. In fact, in 1492, as Columbus left to sail the ocean blue, Jews were being brutally treated and expelled from Portugal, killed along their way. We don't hear that little tidbit in school. To this day, from the halls of our own government, you will hear people use the term poisoning the well, referring to people conspiring to kill off, quote, good legislation through false and evil intentions. Maybe we should say what we fucking mean instead of trafficking in hateful conspiracies based on magical, superstitious nonsense. When you hear a politician say they're poisoning the well, they're repeating something that was coined and only used to blame Jews for killing Christians out of some conspiratorial intent.
Mm-hmm.
So this stuff is deep inside of us, okay? So why such a long trip from all of this? Because this is the legacy we have created in our collective consciousness, especially in the West. We have not reasoned our way beyond it. These anti-Semitic fantasies underlie all kinds of sayings, ideas, and snap judgments even today, and it is vital that we understand how and why all this started so we can deal with the modern-day incarnations of these same tropes. Modern conspiracies that are sometimes very clever at changing the window dressing and presenting it as something new.
Mm-hmm.
The Adrenochrome idea, which we're going to get to in the next episode, and we'll talk about what path that took. It sounds so scientific. Adrenochrome's a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
However, it has nothing to do with what they've packaged as, but it sounds, it's just this. This is what it is.
Mm.
And people have been sucked into this. In the Qanon community, they refer to that conversion, that drawing you in and converting you, as you being pilled.
Yes.
And that comes from the movie The Matrix. Okay,
Yes.
First of all these fucking people are just LARPing out movies.
Seriously.
Everything they will tell you, it's just like that one movie.
Yeah.
And then when you say that's just a movie, they say like, no. That's fucking predictive programming. The evil cabal, they can't. So, okay, I'm going to get into weird shit now. This is true. They believe that this evil cabal using satanic magic can't do things to us unless they tell us they're going to do it. This is some magical principle, some hermetic principle that exists. Is that you can't just do shit. They have to agree to it. You have to get them to accept it. So all these movies, when you see these alien abductions or when you see these government, they're just getting you ready to accept the plan that they're going to roll out. Okay, so you can't reason with these people.
Yeah.
Okay, and so they're living this life, and it was being pilled, right? And that comes from the movie The Matrix.
Yeah.
Remember, he says you want to take the blue pill,
Yep.
the red
Yeah.
pill, all that
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
shit. What's hilarious is The Matrix is an allegory of transitioning from male to female gender by two brothers who did just that. They were brothers when they made the movie. They're sisters now. And back then, early on, when doctors were helping people transition into the gender that they felt more comfortable in, it was known as the red pill because it was this big red pill that the medicine came in. And so when they were telling the story of that, it was this big allegory, but then we took it and seized it upon mind control and AI and these deep secret cabals when really it was an allegory for very deep psychological and societal things that are going on.
Well, when your brain is trained to do that with the Bible, you do it with all the stories.
Right. Yeah. So what do you think? Like, pretty crazy, right? That this is like, there was a time where we would be walking around believing this, and that's what's crazy.
Well, no, what I think is like, that's just as crazy as what they're believing now. So it's not, like you said, nothing's changed, nothing's new.
Yeah.
Like, I'm saying the fantasticalness of what people today are believing, the craziness of this QAnon shit, it's just as crazy as that stuff that you're talking about.
And I think that's why it's so shocking
And
to
it's
me.
shocking, exactly, because
I'm like, they're in the Middle
we think
Ages.
we're smarter. We're supposed to be smarter than those Dark Ages
Hey,
people.
guys, I have some fucking leeches for you, too. What else do you want to go with?
Seriously.
Fucking what?
Anything.
And so I know that this is just the first part, and it doesn't have a lot to do with adrenochrome and the whole current thing. It doesn't matter. You already know what it is about. It is about this.
Yeah.
It is the same thing, and it comes from deeply rooted anti-Semitism. And I don't care if it's been changed to aim it at someone else that isn't Jewish or isn't it was perpetrated upon you by people who do believe that. There are plenty of people. And listen.
And it's just perpetuating the bullshit.
Hey, check out this little fact. Kamala Harris's husband's Jewish. That's the first fucking time anyone's lived in the White House that was Jewish. You think, we'll never elect a black president. That'd be the worst thing we could elect. No, a Jew.
Yeah.
Seriously, we won't have a Jewish president for a long time.
Yeah.
That's how suspicious European bigotry made our underlying thinking.
Yeah.
For real. Like, I mean, you look at Nixon, he fucking hated Jews. You look at our country during the 1930s, we supported Hitler, much of our society, and thought, look at, we already talked about fucking Henry Ford, who had a whole newspaper devoted to the international Jew and how they're the most dangerous threat to our society. This isn't like Middle Ages and now it's popped up.
Yeah.
This has been here with us all along.
Yeah.
And it's time that we reckon with it and not fucking continue
Yeah.
making it worse.
Yeah.
Cool?
Yep.
All right.